In today's gospel reading, we continue with Jesus' Sermon on the Mount from last week. And from a surface reading, we hear him call his disciples to a higher standard of morality in regards to conflict, divorce, adultery, and truthfulness. But if that's all we hear, then we've missed the deeper message. Jesus isn't simply establishing a higher morality, he's calling us to a radically different way of living. Today's gospel is less about the rules of morality than it is about the nature of our relationship to ourselves and to one another. Put simply, today's gospel is about our proclivity to objectify everyone and everything in our lives, including ourselves. When we call someone a fool, we no longer see them as a person with equal value and worth. When we allow a conflict to get to the point where there's only winners and losers, we've lost our common humanity. When divorce simply becomes a tool of convenience, we trivialize the bond that once existed. When we look at another person with only sexual desire, we make them nothing more than a thing to be used. And when we rely on oaths and assurances rather than simply being authentic, we fail to honor the integrity within us. This is the point that Jesus is making. This is the call within his teaching. We live in an age when a teaching such as this is incredibly timely and deeply needed. Whether looking at the rise of anti-Semitism, both to Jews and Muslims, the xenophobia of rank nationalism, the hateful speech and behavior of racism, or the polarized and nasty nature of our politics, one could argue that in some respects we're experiencing our own living hell. I don't know about you, but in the face of so much pain and brokenness, I often feel overwhelmed and wonder what, if anything, we can do. How can we stem this tide of hate that infects our collective soul? Well, like everything else in this life, we have to start with ourselves. We have to come to terms with the idea that morality is about relationships and not necessarily about the rules. We have to begin the process of not objectifying one another. We have to find our common humanity and see the fullness of that humanity in the people that we encounter, both those we agree with and those we don't. I'll confess to you that I struggle with this way of living. It's far too easy to limit people to what my senses tell me. It's far too easy to make judgments based on those experiences. As a trivial example, I want to talk about something that I've talked about in a previous sermon, namely the grocery store. When was the last time you thought about the cashier who checked you out? I don't know about you, but when I get to the cashier, I'm ready to simply get my bill and pay it and leave. How much do I think about that person's humanity? How open am I to experiencing mystery and the sacred in their presence? Is it simply enough to be, is it enough to simply be polite? To obey the basic rules of society? Or are we being called to do more than that? You know, this is even more true when we find ourselves in disagreement or conflict. You know, at this point in our history, in this country, we are being conditioned to deny the humanity of those with whom we disagree, whether it's politically, theologically, or socially. It's far too easy to label our opponents and reduce them to a caricature rather than seeing a whole person in front of us. I ask you, what would it look like if in the midst of our disagreements, we chose to fully see each other and the mystery that is present? Take a moment right now and think of someone you know who doesn't think the way you do. Someone who might make you angry, or at the very least, be an object of derision. Someone who it's easy to label. Imagine your own humanity in that person. Your humanity in them. Wonder at how in the midst of their life they might have come to the ideas and values with which you so disagree. Imagine what it might feel like to live in their reality and not your own. That's the call. That's what we're being called to. If we want to change things, if we want to be a people of God, then this is the call for how we are to live in this world. And we must do this with everyone with whom we have a relationship. We must in some way do this with everyone we encounter. It's this kind of living that Jesus calls us to in today's gospel. But I would remind you, he isn't simply inviting us to a higher standard of morality, a new set of rules. He's calling us into a deep mystery. When we live as he has called us, we encounter a deep mystery. We become agents of peace and reconciliation in this sinful and broken world. We move from estrangement to community. We experience nothing less, my friends,